story, and they did not tell the other group of people a story. The people that were told a story were told a story about this young boy and his father and their relationship and how the young boy had cancer. They told that story to one group, didn't tell it to the other, and then at the end, the group that had heard the story actually gave much more money than they were asked to donate to a nonprofit, and the ones that heard the story gave more money than the ones that didn't. So storytelling will move people to give you their money, which is probably what some of you need. So there's a classic structure to a story, the 3-act structure, all the way back to Aristotle in Poetics. He said that stories had a 3-act structure. And there's a classic way that those 3 acts are structured. First, Act 1, there's a likable person. Act 2 is called the messy middle. This is where that person that you liked a lot goes through some really, really hard times. That's called the messy middle. This in the movies might be something like, the hero gets hit by a car, eaten by a dragon, and then impaled in the shoulder, and then loses the girl. Like, it's just terrible. Like, the middle is hard. And then what happens is in the 3rd act, the protagonist is changed because he went through this very difficult middle part. This is a classic 3-act structure. So what the messy middle does is it creates this anticipation and emotional appeal, and what in classic storytelling is called the climax. This creates an arc. So there's the exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and a denouement. So you can see that it has this kind of an arc, a rise and a fall. It rises and then it falls. That rising and falling is very important in storytelling, and that's why your pitches and your presentations need to have that sense of rise and fall. It rises and then they get a cathartic release because you solved a mystery or you solved a problem. So what Cornell University's lab did is they put 1,600 stories from the Gutenberg Project from Google into a calculator, into an algorithm, and they found that the 1,600 stories all had that rise and fall to them. So what I had done when I started getting into storytelling, I spent 3 years as a CEO. I got up between 4 and 5 every day, studied storytelling until noon, and did my CEO job from noon until 9. So it was a big 3-year-long commitment, just studying story, studying the shape of story, because I knew it was powerful, but I didn't know why. So you sit at a cocktail party, you're listening to a story, something kind of sparkly and bubbly happens when a story is being told, and I wanted to know what that was. So I thought, the greatest speeches of all time also have a cadence to them, some sort of a rise and a fall, a rise and a fall. You lean in and then you have a feel. You lean in and then you feel. And I wanted to figure out what that was. So I got a speech literally called the 100 greatest speeches of all times. I started analyzing them. So I thought, what did the best orators, the best verbal communicators, how come their speeches had a pattern and you would feel, but yet in most business presentations, they don't even have a 3-act structure. Some of them don't even have a beginning, a middle, and an end. So I looked at all the greatest speeches, why they rise and fall, and how do we use this pattern to help others. So I'll never forget, I was in my office about 8 years ago, and I thought I actually could see the pattern. I could just see it, kind of like Neo in The Matrix. I could just see it all of a sudden. I'm like, honey, you go away and golf. I'm going to go to the office. I'm going to draw a pattern. I drew the pattern, and I compared it to Steve Jobs' 2007 iPhone launch speech and Dr. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, and it worked for both of them. And I was very excited to make this discovery. It was also kind of I was awestruck too, because I compared it against some speeches from some very evil people, and it also worked for that. So it comes with great responsibility, but this is the shape that great speeches use. So if you think of it kind of like a story arc, but this is what you do for speeches. I'll break it down. It has a 3-act structure. So your pitches should state what is, and then it should move to what could be. And that gap between what is and what could be is that rising of tension that kind of needs to happen to keep people engaged. And then what happens structurally, as a structural device, you move between what is, what could be, what is, what could be, as a structural device. And what happens is suddenly their current reality, their status quo, suddenly is not desirable, and your new hope of a future becomes more desirable. So you're moving them away from status quo and toward the bright hope of a future. And then you have a call to action, and at the end, you state a new bliss. There's a principle of recency that says people will remember the last thing you said more than they'll remember the beginning or the middle. So you want that last thing you say to be absolutely amazing. Just use beautiful words to craft how great your future is with your technology adopted. How amazing is human flourishing should they choose to align with you? How glorious will it be for your employees if they do your initiative? You end stating the new bliss. This particular type of talk you would use at all hands meetings, you would use at industry conferences, you would use it for public speaking. This is the structure of a staged presentation, you could say. I use this in my meetings. I use it to get my husband to do chores on the weekend. It's very persuasive. So once I had the shape, I started to use it as an analysis tool, and I want to walk you through some talks I did, heavily weighted political, because so many of the great business talks are internal or private. But let me walk you through. This is Margaret Thatcher, became known as the Iron Lady because of her Iron Lady speech. And this is the shape of the speech. You can see it's a structural device. There's no real pattern to it, but she's moving back and forth between what is, what could be, what is, what could be, ending high and to the right with the new bliss. Nehru gave a speech. In India, it's as beloved as our I Have a Dream speech. It's called A Tryst with Destiny. And this was the speech he gave at midnight, the night that India was freed from British rule. This particular speech followed the pattern with a more even cadence than any speech I analyzed. He moved between the brokenness and the sorrow and the hope of a new future, the pain and suffering of drawing the borders and how now there'll be unity. So it was what is, what could be. Evita Peron, this was one of the largest gatherings in history, but nobody really knows about it. She gave a speech from the Playa in May. It was a 10-minute speech. The people, there was actually mobs of people that swarmed to hear this speech. At the end of this speech, they all chanted for her to run for the vice presidency of her country. So it's the only time I've ever been able to see a two-directional dialogue between the speaker and the audience. After her speech was done, they were chanting for her to run for the vice presidency. And they wanted more of her. Not very often people speak, they want more of you, and they want to elevate the leader into a stronger position of power. So this speech is fascinating. Charles de Gaulle, even the French, used the form. This was the speech he gave on the radio from England. This one will probably be most interesting to the geeks in the room. This is Richard Feynman, physics professor at Caltech University, and he was a physicist, part of the Manhattan Project, which he was super sad about, but he was the most popular teacher at Caltech. So many people loved his lectures. People that didn't even need to take a physics class would come and audit it because he was such a fantastic lecturer. So you look at a really technical subject like the law of gravity, and here is a law of gravity lecture that he gave. This was actually one of the tightest cadences I had ever seen, because he would introduce, here's physics, and here's physics applied in the year 2000. Well, this was 1960. So he's like, here's physics today. Just imagine physics applied at the level of subatomic particles. So he was completely amazing. Steve Jobs, his 90-minute his 90-minute iPhone launch speech. You can see here that he has a heightened sense of what could be. He's constantly painting a picture of a bright and better future with you using his products. You can see there's a little break at the very end, and that's when he had a clicker malfunction. And the clicker isn't working, and so he kills the time right there by telling a personal story. So he told a story about how he and Steve Wozniak used to do television jamming to the students at the campus, and how the students thought some way they were contorting their body was fixing the television jamming. So he told a story about a technical malfunction, and then finished his talk. And then, of course, Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech was 16 minutes long. And you can see it gets tight. He has kind of a loose cadence, and then it gets really tight. That's his I Have a Dream sequence. So Dr. King actually named this particular speech The Fierce Urgency of Now. That's the actual title of it. The people renamed it the I Have a Dream speech because of this particularly tight cadence. And that's when he moved between what is and what could be at the phrase level. He said, I have a dream that one day. I have a dream that one day. And that's why we call it the I Have a Dream speech. And he ended with incredibly moving passages that were very meaningful to the audience, old hymns and spirituals, and the place went crazy. Those were very powerful people, very influential people. And so now I want to bring it down to earth here a little bit. I want to share with you the way my 11-year-old niece persuaded her dad to get her a mouse. So she's never read my books, never been to one of my workshops, but she is this impassioned 11-year-old, and she really wants a mouse. So I'll walk you through it really quick. What's super interesting about impassioned pleas, which is what you have to make a lot in business, you have to give an impassioned plea to your employees, an impassioned plea to your investors. It's really hard to point to an impassioned plea, a movement, it's hard to point to a movement that didn't start with some sort of an impassioned plea. So here's this most important thing in this little 11-year-old's life. She wrote a letter to her dad because she wanted a mouse. So here we go. Dear Dad, we want a mouse. You might say they're stinky. Yeah, that's what it is, all right? But they're not if you put special drops in their water. Now don't be fooled by this story, because those drops, they do not work. Those things are stinky. You might also say they're mean, but you rarely find an aggressive mouse. If they do bite, it's usually a curiosity nibble. I know you would not want to pay for it, but Sophie and I have that covered. We've saved our birthday money, so we can pay for the mouse and everything else, and you will not have to pay for a single cent. Also, the mouse will be in mine and Sophie's room, so you won't have to see it all the time. And the new bliss, we will respect any decision you make. They got their mouse. You know, it's a simple and practical thing, but what this did for me is it showed me how contrast is natural. She naturally she was so freaking desperate for this mouse. She naturally used contrast to plead with her dad for why she should get it. And we are hardwired that way. We see differences. We walk into situations. Our fight or flight thing all the time is like, am I safe? Is that okay? Should I do this? Should I not? We're constantly contrasting, and contrast as a communication construct is very powerful. So that's how you do it, like a staged talk. What's the difference between that and if you were to do a pitch and you're looking for money from an investor? So if this is the traditional shape, what you do is you actually flip the shape. You start off by saying, here's my new bliss. Here is how humans are going to flourish with my technology. You just state it. The reason you start there is these people are pretty smart. They've been around the block. They've listened to a lot of pitches. The minute you put your idea out there, almost everything fills in for them. It's like a mosaic. You filled in about 80% of the mosaic just by stating what your idea is and how it'll help human flourishing. Then you say, and here's what I need from you, and then you quickly and strategically move back and forth between here's what the technology does, here's how it's going to shape lives. Here's what the technology does, here's how much money it's going to make you. Here's what you move back and forth as rapidly as possible, because what's going to happen is they're going to cut you off, and then they're just going to they're going to take over the conversation, and you're not even going to know which way they're going to go. You have to prepare for this. You have to prepare for an interrupt-driven presentation. You know they are going to interrupt you. It's just inevitable. It's the way they work. The reason they interrupt you is they see most of the idea, but maybe this patch is missing and this patch is missing. They're just trying to fill in the blanks so they can make a decision pretty quickly. They see so many deals, so many ideas, they want to just know right away if they should spend more time with you. So if I were to plot out presentations on some sort of landscape, and you had small or large audiences, super prepared talks versus spontaneous ones, it might look like this. If you have a small audience, and it's a spontaneous kind of presentation or opportunity to persuade, we could say, that's a conversation. Now you can plan for a conversation. In fact, once that executive starts going crazy, you need to have anticipated every single one of their questions as a venture capitalist. So if you have a spontaneous and a large audience, you've probably done something super stupid, like poor Travis did at Uber in the backseat of that car where they taped everything he said and he screamed at the Uber driver. That was spontaneous and it went to a really large audience and he did something kind of stupid. So don't do that. And then basically if you have to prepare for a large audience, it's a formal presentation. And if you've prepared for a small audience, you've actually designed your conversation. So designing the conversation is what you have to do when it whips into them starting to pelt you with questions. So a pitch lives right between partially prepared presentation and a designed conversation. So what happens is, for the actual pitch, you need slides. For the conversation, you need what's called a slide doc. And you can get this slide doc, it's a free book, it's SlideDoc or SlideDocs.com, both work. And what happens is slide docs are a very dense slide. So a dense slide, like you can make your slides look like a magazine. In fact, people don't even have the word collateral for older folks in their vocabulary because we use slide docs now. You can make them very dense and beautiful. If you go to SlideDocs.com, you can see they just look like magazines. And you can use these as modular collateral, your sales collateral, your material. So what you do is when a venture capitalist says, send me your deck, send me 5 slides, they're not wanting cinematic stage presence, minimalistic pictures of kitties. They're wanting a tight, skimmable brief, 5 pages. This skimmable brief, this emissary, opens up the door for you with them. They read it, and they're like, oh, come on in, I want to meet with you. This is where you do your pitch, and it's part slides, part appendix. So you can get through your arc, if you're given 30 minutes, get through your whole arc, your actual talk, in about 10. Anticipate they're going to interrupt you and give that full 20 minutes for them to get to know you. Now you should have backup material, you should know every single thing they might say, and if you need to pull something up real quick, it should be there in your appendix visually. They will ask for your presentation when you're done, so you can PDF it and send it along. Don't just send the cinematic, beautiful part, also send your appendix, so they and their partners can look at it. Then what happens is, that's the leave behind. You actually take the slide doc and you leave it as a leave behind. So this is the structure of a pitch. And I shared this with you today, and I'm going to take questions because I'm done in just a second. The thing that happens when you construct and tailor a talk to your audience, a lot of times when you're so caught up in your idea, we're so excited about our business, we're so excited about what we're doing. When we plan our talks, a lot of times we make it a lot about ourselves. In a situation where the VC and you, or pitch, when you're asking for help, no matter what you're asking for, you have to reframe your mind and understand, even though you're talking the most in the room, you're not the central figure. In storytelling, there's always a hero, and there's always a mentor too. And in myths and movies, the mentor comes alongside the hero and helps them get unstuck. So in every situation, when you're presenting, you're not the main attraction. In your mind and your heart, you need to make your audience be the one you fixate on before you talk, so that you understand their perspective and you meet them where they're at. So my hope from this structure is that you'll be able to craft messages in a way that not only help you win money, which was the focus for today, but actually helps you persuade your customers, get your employees the emotional fuel they need at every moment along the journey, and make all your dreams come true. A lot of people don't know that before this place was called the Silicon Valley, it was actually called the Valley of the Heart's Delight. My father-in-law used to come here from the border of Mexico and pick fruit. It was just rows and rows and rows of fruit. And he would just come and he just picked it. And they had so much they let you pick it and eat it and feed your family back in those days. And many, many ways the Silicon Valley is still that. But in this case, it's ideas that we're picking off these beautiful trees and cultivating and feasting off of. But you can have the best idea in the whole world. If you don't communicate it well, it'll never go anywhere. It'll just stay stuck. The difference between an idea that gets adopted and an idea that doesn't is how well it is communicated. So I encourage you guys to work on your communication skills. Sometimes, especially if you're in technology or you're in pharma or medical, it's hard to do that. That's not a natural skill, but the ones that work hard on it and communicate it in a way that creates human flourishing. People will follow you. A lot of CEOs start and fail and start again, somewhat here at least in the Valley. It's almost a badge of honor. I've walked with CEOs who failed, but they communicated so well and so clearly and had so much passion. The VCs will bet on them again, they bet on them again, they bet on them again. The same CEO, because they know that that CEO will find the idea that gets communicated in a way that gets adoption. So your communication skills are going to be one of the most important things that you do as you start to build your business. So my hope for you is that you do create something that creates delight in others, in yourself, your family, and your employees. So that's the talk, and I want to field questions. I can take questions on leading. I can take, because we have a leadership book. Slideology was my first book, and then I have a whole body of work around this pattern I shared today.